Happy Monday, everyone. Looks like we've come full circle again, and it's time for another week of Cozy Horror with me, Dr. Plague. Let's get you set up with some great stories to help ease you into this difficult work week and make it a little easier. Today's topic of discussion are strange destinations and the strange trips that take us there. And I think I've got some pretty good stories to get you into the mood. Let's start out with a trip down a familiar road that turns a little dark when they decide not to follow the rules. Let's hear a story about toll roads.
I sighed as I saw the toll booth looming up in front of us. My wife and I had driven down this road 1,000 times in the 10 years we'd been married. It was actually the place we took our first date, and we loved to drive down it on Sundays and feel nostalgic. Despite the number of times we've driven the long and winding route, the toll booth always surprises me a little. It sounds weird to say that our first date was a drive, but I think it was honestly pretty sweet. I'm a photographer, have been since I was 19, and I often shoot weddings and family photos for people in the area. I've got an amazing eye for location, and my photos have been featured in not just people's homes, but also in magazines that debut the beauty of North Georgia and the Carolinas. The Appalachians have been my home since I was born, and I know how to bring out her beauty in my photos. I was 22 and on my way to a wedding when I spotted a car on the side of the road with a young woman sitting on the hood. She waved her hands at me, asking if I would stop, and I rolled down my window to see if I could help. She said her car had broken down and was wondering if I could help her out. I'm no mechanic, and my car knowledge stops at changing my oil, so I offered her a ride to the wedding I was attending so she could call a wrecker. She agreed and ended up hanging out with me the whole wedding. The wrecker couldn't get there for 3 or 4 hours, and I was the only person that she knew. So, in between photo shoots, we talked. I got her some food. Weddings usually have a little extra, and this one was more of a country union than a black tie affair. We sat around and chatted as I took some candid shots. We discovered that we actually had a lot in common, and when the wrecker called her, she told him to just drop it off at her mechanic. I drove her home afterwards and invited her to dinner with me later that week. I know what you'll say, it wasn't a real date, but it meant something to us, and we've considered it our first date for years. We even went back on our first anniversary to put a marker where her car had broken down. It may be a little macabre, but we put a wreath there to commemorate her little coupe. It had died on that spot the day we met. We still keep that wreath up. We stop at it sometimes so we can remember how we came to know each other. The spot where her car died is about 2 miles from the toll booth. The toll booth is an oddity. It's just a random toll booth out in the middle of the woods. You put 50 cents in the basket, the booth is never manned, and you head on your way. I have no idea who comes to collect the money. I don't imagine it makes a lot of it, but it's probably some senator's nest egg for when he gets put out of office. We always keep change in the car for just such an occasion, not minding paying a little toll to see the road that started our happy life. Today, however, I couldn't find 50 cents in the cup holder. It's been a busy week. We just put a down payment on our new house, my wife just started a new job, and I had just finished shooting a big wedding that more than paid for the down payment on the new house. But it left us a little light otherwise. We had cashed in our change jar that sat in the cup holder, something to get us by till payday, and I had forgotten to put more change in it afterwards for the toll road. The drive was kind of our date night this weekend. We had a picnic in the back seat, and we were going to go up to the lake where the wedding had been held. The lake was where we had had our own wedding, and we went there often to picnic or swim or just enjoy a quiet afternoon together. "What's the matter?" Carol asked. I dug a nickel out from between the seats and weighed the pathetic little pile of change. 5 pennies, 2 dimes, and a nickel were all I had managed to find under the seats. The arm hung stoically across the road, little more than a wooden suggestion than a real barrier. I had thought many times that I could probably just drive through it and be done with the stupid thing, but such things were a little too rebellious for me. "You got any change?" I asked, doubting she did, but wanting to be sure. "No," she said, looking through her purse before exclaiming, "Aha!" and dropping another nickel onto my palm. "Well, that's a little better, but it's not quite 50 cents. Just dig some out of the change cup," she said. I shook the cup at her, reminding that we had recently traded it in. "Oh yeah. Well, what shall we do, my dear?" I considered turning around, maybe just forgetting the whole thing, but a new idea suddenly bubbled to the surface. I pulled onto the soft shoulder of the road, the car protesting as much as my wife. I'm sure my car's wheels were going to bog down any minute. The shoulder of the road is soft turf and seed grass, and I expected my tires would spew up earth and stick. I'd have to sheepishly explain to some highway patrolman how I'd gotten stuck then. To my surprise, though, I drove easily around the barrier. I laughed and wondered why I hadn't simply done this before. "What are you doing?" my wife asked, half laughing but also half aghast. "We've given this thing 50 cents loads of times. I think it can give us a pass, just this once." We both laughed as we drove away from the lonely little toll booth, but I think even then, I felt a slight twinge on the back of my neck. I would remember it later and realize I had been warned. We drove down the familiar road, taking in nature's bounty and chuckling at our daring. The trees were ablaze with early fall oranges and deep, healthy greens. The sky was a perfect robin's egg blue, and I just knew that the lake would be wonderful today. We could watch the sunset, maybe have a little fire before going home, and snuggling in bed at the end of a perfect day. It was a good plan, but someone had a different one, it seemed. As we drove, my wife watched the leaves with interest. My wife is an unofficial leaf looker, though she would never admit it, and our house has many pictures of beautiful foliage. As I drove, the roads winding onward, I saw her lift her head from the car window and squint at the passing colors. We were both getting on in years, no spring chickens now, but the look she was giving the leaves was decidedly prudish. It was like an old maid who simply can't believe Miss Tyler let her daughter out in that skirt. "John, does something seem off about the trees?" she asked, sounding perplexed. I looked at the trees, the oranges and reds and greens looking completely natural to me, and I told her so. It does, but it doesn't. It's like seeing trees on television. They look kind of glossy, recorded even. I don't know how to describe it. They just look a little weird. I brushed it off, thinking maybe she was seeing things. It had been a long week, and we had been through some pretty stressful times. It was enough to make anyone a little jangled. She kept watching the trees, but I'd put my eyes back on the road, wanting to be there already. We had driven for about another 30 minutes, though, when I had to slow down. Sitting in the road, white and brown with a glossy oak arm, was the toll booth. I stopped and looked around, thinking somebody might be playing a little joke, but there was no one around. The toll booth looked exactly as it had before. It was simulated wood grain, and the walls were painted a dark brown and creamy white. The arm was simulated oak with a glossy finish. It looked exactly like the toll booth, but it couldn't be. Could it? Maybe they thought they'd put up another one, my wife asked, smiling but clearly confused. I laughed a little at that. They were getting a little greedy out here, weren't they? I pulled around this one too, and I watched it disappear in the rearview mirror as we made our way down the road. My wife was still looking raptly at the trees as we drove past, her attention becoming unhealthy. When she asked me to take a look, I glanced over to see the unusual reds and oranges and greens, but something did look a little off about them. Had they become even more vibrant? The foliage looked artificial, almost neon, and it battered against my eyes as we watched them go past. Okay, there's no way you can tell me that was just my imagination. I didn't answer her. I just wanted to get to the lake so we could have our picnic and all would be normal again. This was weird, yeah, but it was just a strange phenomenon. We would make it to the lake and everything would be okay. When we drove here next weekend, or the weekend after that, everything would be just as it had always been. I edged my speed up a little, wanting to pass the weird Technicolor trees and get into the deep woods I knew were coming. We had driven for about another half hour when my brakes screeched against the pavement. I blinked. It just couldn't be. I had been driving these roads for 10 years, and it was always just the one toll booth. My wife seemed startled too, leaning forward to look unbelievingly at the little booth. It looked exactly like the other two, but that was impossible. We had passed it twice, and I was sure there was only one toll booth out here. There would be no reason to think a second one would make any difference. There was so little traffic out here. "What the hell?" my wife asked. And when I pulled around the arm this time, it was a little more aggressively than I meant to. Maybe, she started, pausing a little as she looked nervously at me, maybe we should just pay the toll. I didn't say anything. I had been too mad to even acknowledge the prickle on the back of my neck this time. Stupid, money-grubbing jerks. They hadn't figured they could line their pockets enough with just one toll booth, so they had to have 2 more. This was unbelievable. I had a sense of humor about the first one, but if they thought they were going to gouge me for another toll, babe, they had another thing coming. I was going to write my congressman, my senator. I'd write the freaking president about this. They couldn't just, John, gouge people like this. What about tourism? What about local beauty spots? What the hell happened to bringing people out so they could, John! I stopped on the brakes and turned to yell, "What?" at my wife as she stared out the window. Normally, she would have chastised me for yelling at her. I don't think I had yelled at her more than a couple of times our whole marriage, but she was too shaken to even take notice. She was looking out the window, staring at the trees with the strange leaves and pointing with a shaky finger. Look, she stuttered, and I turned to see what she was babbling about. The leaves were still eye-destroyingly bright, but this time they were also melting off the trees. Not regular melting either, but like wet paint dripping off an oversaturated object. I could see them dribbling onto the ground, pooling on the grass as the verdant green lawns became spin art. I put my eyes forward, racing the engine, and tried to reach what I knew was ahead as fast as I possibly could. The toll booth came into view again, but I didn't stop this time. What are you doing?" my wife said, getting nervous as I didn't slow down. I gunned the engine, revving to 70 on the straightaway. "Stop it. Stop. Don't do that." The engine growled as I nudged it up to 80. "John," my wife screamed, but it was too late. I crashed through the wooden arm and laughed maniacally as the wooden pieces cascaded off the hood and flew to either side. I had made a lot of mistakes that day, but damaging the booth, that was the worst one. My wife screeched when I hit the arm, but one look at me had reduced her to silence. I glanced over at her and immediately felt sorry for what I had done. My foot came off the ignition, and the car slowly spun to a stop in the middle of the 2-lane road. I had damaged state property. I was sure there was some sort of camera on the booth somewhere, and it would be easy enough to see me ramming the arm. I thought about driving back to the booth and seeing if there was a number I could call to report the accident, but finally I just decided to keep going so we could make it to the lake before dark. As I drove, I realized my wife had been silent the whole time. I turned to tell her I was sorry, to apologize for going a little nuts back there, but she wasn't paying any attention to me at all. She was looking at the countryside as it rolled by. "Honey, I'm sorry about all that. I just let it all get to me. I'm sorry for yelling. Sorry for acting like a psycho. I was just so... The trees are wrong, John." Her voice sounded on the edge of hysteria. "What?" I asked, craning my neck around. "They're all dead. They're all dead, John." I turned right, wanting to see what she was talking about, but when I saw the trees, I wasn't sure why it had taken me so long to see. The trees, so vibrant and colorful before, were now sickly and forlorn. The vibrant colors had oozed right out of them, and the leaves hung limply from the trees as their bark hung pale and peeling. It wasn't just the trees either. The sky looked yellow and sick. It made no sense. What the hell was going on? This was nothing like how the road usually was. It was nothing like how it had looked the first time we'd seen the toll booth. I put my foot down on the ignition, and we kept rolling forward towards our destination. It only got weirder the longer we drove. The longer we drove, the more I expected to run into that toll booth again. The longer I drove and didn't encounter that ramshackled booth, the more paranoid I became. The world outside didn't help much either. The sky became darker and darker as we went. The leaves began to drop from the trees in droves. The limbs were skeletal, the bark crumbling from the long, fragile limbs, and the farther we traveled, the more desiccated they became. We should have come to the deep woods by now. We should have come to the lake by now. We should have seen another car, seen a deer, seen something. My wife stopped looking out the window, and I kept sneaking glances at her to make sure she was okay. She just sat hunkered against the seat, rubbing her shoulders as she tried not to notice what was going on outside. I should have been worried about her. I should have stopped to make sure she was okay, but I was feeling on the verge of mental collapse myself. We never made it to our destination, little as I would have wanted to get out if we had. As the sun began to set, I realized how much worse it could get. "Honey," I whispered, not sure how long it had been since we'd spoken. It felt like days, weeks, but my mind railed against this idea. We were just a little lost on a road we had driven so many times we could have set the mile markers. I wasn't sure what was going on here, but I was sure that we would come out of it okay. "We shouldn't have driven around it." "What?" I asked, confused by her answer. "We shouldn't have hurt the toll booth." She turned towards me and she looked afraid. "We should have just paid the toll. Now it's mad, and it might never let us get off this road." "That's nonsense," I said, but it lacked conviction. I had been out here at night before, driving home after a day on the lake, but I had never seen it this dark. The trees no longer looked to be the old pines that I'd come to love. The trees I could see from the headlights looked more like maples, with a thick dark sap running out of them. If I looked too long at them, some of them even seemed to have faces. I always looked away when I noticed this, afraid to meet their gaze, but I could feel them looking at me nonetheless, challenging me to meet their eyes. As much as I wanted to tell her she was wrong, I couldn't argue the fact that we seemed to be stuck, and it had all started after we drove around the toll booth. "Quick, dig under the seat and see if you can find 15 cents. She looked at me in disbelief. "What? 15 cents? That way, if we see the toll booth again, we can pay the toll and get out of here," I nearly growled at her. She moved slowly, like someone in a dream. She began to search under the seats for change, and as she searched, I kept driving. I was beginning to believe that something outside the norm might be at play here, and the further we drove, the more I also believed that we were being followed. The moon hung overhead, the bright yellow moon like a kid's Halloween drawing, and by that popcorn yellow beam, I could see things running through the woods. They loped along like big dogs, their bodies oddly elongated, and their legs thick and long. I never got more than a quick look at them, but that look was enough. I think I see a quarter in the track of the seat, but I can't get it. Can you pull over so I can reach it?" I gritted my teeth, but a quarter would get us there for sure. I pulled over slowly, my lights still glaring into the woods, and told her to please be quick. My wife stepped out, getting down beside the car so she could reach below the seat. I glanced around nervously, watching the woods for signs of the creatures. My wife was saying how she almost had it, but it kept slipping through her fingers. I told her to be quick, and when I looked back at the tree line, I saw one. It was like a mountain lion that had been dipped in tar. It was like a massive cat, with black ridges of overlapping plates. I imagined I could see the headlights reflected off its grinning mouth full of razor-sharp teeth, and its claws clicked impatiently on the edge of the pavement. "Carol," I whispered, not taking my eyes off the creatures. "I've almost got it," she growled through gritted teeth. The creature didn't seem to have eyes, but its head turned menacingly towards the car as Carol spoke. As the quarter came free, I reached down and grabbed her by the collar of her t-shirt, lifting her into the car. My wife isn't large, maybe 5 feet, but at that moment it wouldn't have mattered if she'd been a giant. I pulled her back into the car and pushed my foot down on the accelerator as hard as I could, the door bumping shut as we got back on the road. If I had hesitated even a moment longer, we'd likely be dead. As it was, I clipped the beastie in the side of the head instead of full in the side. The chest of the creature would have caved the front of my car in, but its head whipped heavily to the side as it broke one of the headlights. I barely noticed as I flew down the road at 70, the other creatures in hot pursuit. We were doing 90 as we barreled forward, but I could see the pack of nightmare hounds right behind us. The rear lights lit their chitinous faces hellishly, and I took the hairpin turns with wheel-screeching accuracy. I'm no NASCAR driver, but the sight of those creatures behind me was enough to push me onward. If they caught me, we'd both be dead. If I crashed, we'd both be dead anyway. Seemed like either way, our options were pretty limited. They followed us for a long while, too long for creatures their size. I was driving 90 most of the time, but they kept pace as easy as if I'd been going 20. I was keeping ahead of them, but only just. I felt them bump the back bumper more than once, They seemed intent on forcing me off the road, but they couldn't quite hit hard enough to force me off. My wife shuddered every time we got hit, and I found myself barely able to keep it on the road after every successful strike. After some indiscriminate amount of time, I looked in the rearview mirror to find that we were alone again. A few minutes later, I saw the toll booth come up into view, but not the one I was used to seeing. This toll booth was black, the paneling looking like the skin on those creatures, and the arm looked like an unprocessed tree trunk. I didn't hesitate. I dropped the money into the basket, whispering sorry as the arm slid up to permit us. We pulled through the turnstile, and it was like crossing some kind of barrier into another world. My grandmother had grown up in Ireland, and had sometimes told me stories about people who crossed the barrier between their world and into the realm of Fae. Grandma always said that people could cross into the fairy realm without realizing it, but I knew all too well when I crossed the border out of whatever place we had been in. It was like passing under the coldest waterfall I could imagine. We got home without incident, but it's the craziest thing. We had voicemails from our friends, a client, and even my wife's new job, asking where we were and why we had been gone for so long. It seemed that even though we had left just after lunch on Sunday, we didn't return till Tuesday night. The car is still damaged, so I know we didn't imagine it. The car is damn near out of gas, and the oil shows that it's almost due for an oil change, despite having been done less than a month ago. I don't know what the hell happened to us, but I know I'll be keeping money in the cup holder from now on. Whether we ever choose to go down that road again or not, I will always have money to feed the toll booths that may appear in my life. You never know where they might take you if you don't play by the rules.
So make sure you remember to pay the toll wherever it is that you're heading. Coming up next, we have a story about a man leaving work. A man who discovers more on the road than he might have bargained for. So let's hear a story about the sewer.
When I was in high school, I had a job at a local fast food chain. I worked there for 4 years, freshman year right up until I left for college, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't have some good times there. Holidays are spent together because we don't have much of a choice. Managers who were either good people or just entertaining to work with, coworkers who really became more like friends the longer you were there, and everything in between. I'm not going to say the whole 4 years was great, but it was an experience that I wouldn't trade for anything. Hell, I think everyone should have to work fast food for at least a few months. It gives you a little bit of perception on the guy behind the counter. The chain I worked for was unique in many ways. They were one of the few who let people host events in the lobby. We had a small concert there once for a local metal band, which made for some entertaining times. We had a policy to hire 14-year-olds under special circumstances, which got us into trouble more than once, due to 14-year-old girls flirting with much older guys. This led to allegations of underage hookups in the back room. They had a weird rehabilitated cons program that hired ex-cons fresh from prison, too. That one worked really well with the aforementioned hiring 14-year-olds policy, and also led to a couple of guys robbing the store after getting off shift. I don't even think they bothered to take their name tags off, so they were pretty easy to catch. One of my favorites, though, was our 24-hour program, which ran pretty much every summer that I worked there. You see, since I was under 18, I wasn't allowed to work past 10 on a school night. But during the summer, I could work as late or as early as I wanted, and I took full advantage of this to fill my pockets with cash. As you may have guessed, this program added a third shift to the usual 2-shift schedule, and it was a 12-hour shift to boot. You'd come in at 6 p.m., just as the dinner rush was ramping up, and work until 6 a.m., when the openers were coming in for their second cup of coffee. The hours were shit, and the pay still wasn't great. No pay differential for late shifts. But what made it worthwhile was the 4-hour lull in between 1 a.m. and 5 a.m. You might have to churn out some cheeseburgers or chicken nuggets for a bunch of drunk college kids, or a carload of stoners who might wander in wanting nuggets. But for the most part, you just kept the store clean and kind of hung out. It was usually a light crew, too, and on the night the story takes place, I had a good bunch of guys with me. I'd gotten my friend a job there that year. We'll call him Ryan, 'cause he might read this. He and Trevor were on the grill that night. I was running the drive-thru window, and my favorite manager was watching the store, a guy named Joseph. Joseph was one of those rare managers that didn't have his head crammed up his ass and gave just enough of a shit to fly under the radar. He was a cool guy. I sometimes wonder whatever happened to him. Anyway, it had been a long night, to say the least. The dinner rush was particularly bad, so as it starts to die down, we picked over the old food in the warming box and went to the break room to hang out. Some managers frowned on this, some would even write you up for it, but Joseph was cool and genuinely liked most of us. The lobby doors were locked at midnight to keep the weirdos out, and with the headset turned up so I could hear if a car rolled into the drive-thru, we started eating old cheeseburgers and swapping stories. The stories started pretty blandly. This thing that happened or that thing that someone had heard about. But finally, we fell into creepy stories about stuff we had experienced. I told them about the weirdo in our parking lot a few years ago who'd creeped a bunch of people out before the cops arrived. They found his wife's head in the passenger seat, along with a giant bloody machete. We thought he meant to rob or murder us, but it turns out he was just having a nervous breakdown in our parking lot after offing his old lady. Trevor tried to top it with a story about the time he'd been drinking with his cousin out in a cornfield, but none of us believed him. He said the old farmer had come out in the cornfield, slasher flick style, and screamed at them to get off his property while chasing them with a pitchfork. We piled in the truck and sped off, but something hit the back tailgate hard. Well, we didn't stop till we got to my cousin's house, and what we saw when we got out was the last thing we expected. He paused for dramatic effect. "What was it?" said Ryan, after Trevor had milked it for a little too long. "A pitchfork. The guy had thrown a pitchfork and stuck it right in the tailgate of the truck. If it had been a little higher, it would have come through the back rear glass and took all three of us right in the back of the head." He paused again like this should have been a dramatic revelation, but Ryan and I both shared a look like we doubted most of this had actually happened. When Joseph spoke up from the doorway, all three of us jumped. He'd been counting down the safe, so he hadn't been there for the start of the spooky stories. But it appeared he had come in just in time to catch the tail end of Trevor's story. Joseph was older than all three of us, a guy in his 30s with a wife and kids, and we often forgot that when we were hanging out because of how naturally he related to us. He was an avid gamer who did all the cool stuff we all hoped we'd be doing when we were adults. Right then, though, he had a decidedly dad look on his face as he addressed our little gathering of storytellers. "I've got a story for you guys," he said, spinning a chair around and sitting in it with his arms folded over the back. "And it's a true story, too. You want to hear it?" We did, and he began. I was working at the downtown store at the time, living in this dingy little apartment with my wife. We were broke, and she was pregnant and out on maternity leave. I was finishing up my bachelor's degree during the day, so nights were all I could count on to pay the bills. This was before the owner started up the third shift, or I'd have been all over that. So there I was, working the 3 to 11 shift, busting my hump, and we had a real hard-ass manager who kept us late almost every night, usually unpaid overtime, since we couldn't clean it right the first time, apparently. So most nights, I was lucky to get out of there about 12:30. The night in question had been especially bad, and I didn't get permission to leave until almost 1 in the morning. It was Friday night, though, so I knew I could sleep up until shift tomorrow if I needed to. Picking up my bag, I started trudging home through the chilly January air. Now, I know it rarely gets cold here, being Florida and all, but that winter had been particularly bad. They had all talked about snow more than once, and it had obliged us by dumping a semi-solid sheet of slush all over the place the night before. Most of it was off the road, but the wind was howling at me as I pulled my coat tight and walked up the deserted center of the road. Now, downtown is usually party central, unless you feel like driving to the beach, but tonight it was so cold that even the bars and coffee shops and all-night diners had shuttered their faces and gone to bed. The streetlights were on, and the sewer grates were belching steam up into the cold night. The whole scene looked pretty creepy to me. So, I'm walking up the center of the road, and there's a damn good reason I'm doing that, too, in case you were wondering. I was made aware of Stephen King's It from a very young age, and it had given me a real phobia about sewer drains. I didn't want to walk too close because, even with all that hard-won 23 years of wisdom I had, I just knew that on a cold, lonely night like tonight, I would get a taloned hand around my ankle and a quick trip into the sewer if I stepped too close to those smoking holes. So I walked right up the center of the street, as far from the grates as I could, and that particular night, it led me into trouble. So I'm walking up the center line, boots clomping on the asphalt, as I made my way through this way too quiet street. That's when I heard a noise. I thought at first it was the sound of steam escaping the grates. It was a hissing noise after all, but when it came again, I heard it for what it was. You remember in grade school when some kid behind you wants to pass a note, so he makes that psst sound at you to get your attention? Well, that's what this sound was, a psst sound from the left side of the road. So I turn around, but I don't see anyone. I start walking again, and that same psst sound comes again from the left side of the road. I squinted at the dark alley between two buildings, getting ready to start flying if someone comes running out to mug me. But it's empty. That's when I heard it again. This time, somebody says something in a low voice, too. It sounds like, psst, hey buddy, followed by that sound again, psst, psst. Then I look down, and, I kid you not, there is a face in the drainage grate. As the steam comes curling up around it, I see a midnight black face looking out at me, and the only thing I can make out is its eyes, and they look fucking huge. I booked it. I start running, but as I run, I hear the voice behind me, shouting for me to come back. Then I realize the voice isn't behind me anymore. I glance to my left, and I see that it's following me from the openings of the sewer grates. Loud feet are slapping on the stone down there, and he's trying to get my attention. That's when I hear him yell real loud and fall with a watery splash. I didn't slow down in the least bit, but I saw the black ice a little too late when I turned back around. I hit it. My feet shot straight up and out from under me. I fell back hard against the pavement, and I was pretty sure I had broken my elbow when I came down hard on the concrete. At the time, I was trying to make my head stop spinning as the black spots danced around. I struggled up to my elbow, wincing as I got up on my hurt one, just as the spots started to go away. That's when I saw something that made my blood run cold. "What?" I asked, unable to help myself, wrapped up so deeply until at that moment I had barely realized I was breathing. The manhole cover, not 5 feet away, was coming up, and the face is looking out at me. I tried to get up, and I slipped again as this dripping, oozing thing climbed out of the opening. He towers over me from my prone position, and I start pushing with my legs as I slide away from him. He comes out oozing and quivering from the dark tunnel, and in my mind, he is the apotheosis of every shadowy creature from every horror movie I have ever seen. He is the creature from the Black Lagoon. He is it, the blob, and he's coming to drag me back down into the darkness so he can slowly devour me. His foot slaps down hard on the concrete as he menaces towards me. I'm still trying to slide away on my butt, my elbow starting to cry out now, and when my low back hits the curve, I just froze there as this creature from the midnight cinema towers over me, its oozing flesh dripping onto the concrete. It takes large, ponderous steps as it moves in on me, and at this point, I'm so gripped with fear I can't even move. Its flesh falls to the ground in gooey plops, and after 1,000,000 years crammed into 5 seconds, it's standing not 3 feet away from me. It bends its mountainous head down towards me, and in a gravelly voice, it says the last 3 words I figured I would ever hear, and they're the last 3 words I ever expected to hear from a creature like this. At this point, he looks at us, his mask of pent-up terror melting into a creepy smile, the creepiest smile I've ever seen, as he gravels out, "Got a light?" We sat, dumbfounded, for nearly 15 seconds before Trevor sputters, "What?" Joseph laughs. He asked if I had a light. It turns out he was a homeless guy who'd been living in the sewers to stay warm. He had gotten himself a pry bar so he could hook it under the lid, and he'd been staying in the sewers at night where it was warm. He had no clue why it was so steamy down there, but it was a great place to sleep when the alternative was freezing your ass off in the park or down by the pier with the other vags. When I asked him why he was covered in what I hoped was mud, he said that he'd been chasing after me, trying to get a lighter to spark a cigarette. Then he'd fallen in a muddy slush puddle and gotten covered in the stuff. I laughed and handed him the lighter out of my bag, an old Zippo my old man had given me, and considered it a fair trade for a great story. I've told that story so many times over the years, and it never gets old. We laughed about that story and Joseph's deadpan way of building it up right until the very end, for years to come. I've begged him to retell it 150 times, and it never gets old. So if you're ever downtown on a cold night and someone tries to get your attention from the closest sewer grate, just remember that it's probably some vagrant trying to stay warm and have a smoke. And if they drag you down into the sewer for a slow process of digestion, then I guess I was wrong, wasn't I?
So be very careful who you answer when they call to you from the sewers. Coming up next, we have a couple of gals out for a good time who discover something unfortunate about their evening and about the world, it seems. So let's hear a story about one drunken night.
It was all my fault. It had almost cost Felicia and I our lives. Our friend Sandy was having a house party, and we both wanted to go. Sandy threw the best parties, and they usually got pretty wild. The last one had been a real blowout, and we both had a little more than foggy memories from it. Sandy was celebrating her graduation from nursing school, so we all knew this one was going to be a serious rager before she had to settle in to pay student loans. Before we went, Felicia and I agreed that one of us needed to stay sober so we could get home safely. "We don't want a repeat of last time," Felicia reminded me, and I nodded as I remembered how the Uber driver had tried to hold us captive until we agreed to invite him in. Running in heels is never fun, but we had managed it that night and beat him to the door of our apartment. So, we did rock, paper, scissors for it. Went 10 out of 10, and I ended up with the loss. I wasn't happy about it, but I decided that I would do my best to stay sober so we could get home without having to A, get rides from creepy handsy guys, B, get murdered by a stranger, or C, have to take a cab that neither of us could afford. We pulled up to the party already in full swing, and I took a deep breath as I prepared to say no to temptation and be the best sober friend I could be. I lasted all of an hour before I just couldn't hold out anymore. Someone handed me a drink, didn't even ask, and I drank it before I could think better of it. It was one of the very tasty screwdrivers that were going around, so I decided then and there that this would be my only one. I could still hold out. One drink wasn't going to get me. An hour after that, I was completely plastered. Felicia was not pleased when she found me. She had decided to go all in, so now both of us were drunk and had no clue how we were going to get home. We took one look at each other, laughed, and said screw it. We drank way more than we should have that night and had a blast. We danced, we drank, and we mingled our way through the party. And when Sandy waved us out around 2 a.m., we were basically holding each other up. I staggered to the car, but I couldn't even get my key in the door to unlock it, let alone drive. Felicia and I decided that we would just walk home. It was 7 blocks from Sandy's house, but we had no chance of getting a cab this late, and the Ubers would be all weirdos at this point. Felicia agreed, but was basically dead weight after 3 steps. She was ready to sleep and certainly wasn't interested in walking 7 blocks. I was holding her up, looking for options as my own buzz wavered, when I saw
a yellow cab parked at the corner. I got excited. It was a little late for cabs, but I wasn't about to question Providence. The light was still on, the guy in the front seat looking pretty awake, and I thought our luck might be turning around as we staggered towards him. I knocked on the window, and the guy with the red hair snugged down under a driving cap jumped as he turned to look at me. He was a big guy, big with fat instead of muscle, and he looked surprised but also delighted as he rolled the window down. He asked how he could help us, and I told him we needed a lift. He asked where we were going, and after telling him the address, I offered to give him a nice big tip if he got us there safely, with no weirdness. "Yes, ma'am, I believe I can manage that," he said with a big smile. "Hop in." So we piled in the back, he turned off his light, and off we went. Felicia was asleep about the time we made the first turn, but I decided to stay awake to make sure the driver didn't try any funny business. We were from a pretty big city, and girls had been going missing pretty regularly lately. You read about it on Facebook all the time. They go out, get a little drunk, and then they're never seen again. No one really knew what it was, but a lot of people thought it was a murderer. It was scary to think about, but I felt a little safer being in a real cab rather than an Uber with some random guy. You never quite knew what the vetting process was on Uber, but I knew the cab companies had to do background checks on their drivers, so at least this fellow was on the up and up. "You ladies coming from a club?" he asked, making small talk as he took his first left. "A house party," I said, trying to be polite. "Our friend was throwing a real heck of a get-together, and we partied a little too hard, I think." "Sounds like fun. Looks like your friend had a little too much, though." "Yeah, she does that sometimes. I was supposed to stay sober so I could drive us home, but I'm not very good at it." "Well, I guess it's a good thing for me, then." I made a non-committal noise and settled back. There was a little holder on the partition with waters in it, and when I reached for one, I saw the cabbie turn to track my movements. He seemed interested in what I was doing, and I held up one of the waters and said one of his fares must have left it behind. It was a shame because my stomach was a little too full of alcohol, and some water would have been really nice. "Oh, those are for my fares. I have a bunch in the cooler in here. I replaced them as needed. Help yourself." I thanked him, testing the seal to make sure that it was still sealed. It seemed to be, but I never got it open. The feel of the wheels beneath me was lulling me to sleep, and I was losing the fight. I tried to stay awake, but I was just too drunk. My eyes kept slipping shut and opening, and as I threatened to go under for good, I heard the cabbie's phone ring. He picked it up, talking to someone, and it was like his whole demeanor changed. There was a very different voice than I was used to. Gone was the jovial guy who had picked us up, and now he was gruff and kind of short with whoever he was talking to. It seemed like a complete flip in personality. "Yeah, I got him. We'll be there soon." I started to ask what he meant by that, but before I could question the statement, I was unconscious. I don't know how long we were out for, but I woke up suddenly, unsure of where we were. I looked around, groggy and disoriented. Felicia was still sleeping beside me, dead to the world and not showing any signs of coming back, and the cabbie was still behind the wheel and driving us home. At least, I thought he was. I glanced out the window, no longer seeing tall buildings and concrete, and I thought he must have taken a wrong turn. We were in the country. The buildings traded for rural pavement and shadowy houses. Everything was dark outside, no street lights this far out in the country, and I just watched it whiz by for a moment as I tried to make sense of it. I was confused, not sure how we had gotten so lost. Then I remembered the conversation before we passed out. "Yeah, I got him. We'll see you soon." Even in my drink-addled brain, I remembered those words. I glanced at the numbers on the dashboard clock and was surprised to see that we had been in the cab for over an hour. It shouldn't have taken that long to get home. 7 blocks would have been an easy drive this late at night. And as I tried to sit up, I felt something press against my wrist. The unopened water was a cool pressure against my arm. I didn't remember opening it and realized I must have fallen asleep before I could drink it. My vision swam as I tried to come upright, and I blinked quickly to clear it. Where? I tried, but my throat was dry. Where are we? The cabbie jumped a little, probably figuring I'd passed out like my friend, and when he looked over his shoulder, I heard again the voice of that happy cabbie who had picked us up again. We're driving to your home. I tried to make his words make sense, but it was like wading through mush. This isn't right. I live in the city. You told me 175 Worth Street, he said, tapping his phone in the holder on the dash. No, I slurred, trying to make my head stop spinning. It was 751 Worthy Street. We were... I put a hand in my mouth as hot vomit threatened to come coursing up. We were only 7 blocks from our house. He put a theatrical hand to his brow. Oh my gosh, I guess I put the address in wrong. Let me just find a place to turn around and we'll get you back on track. He started tapping at his phone, but I could see he wasn't hitting anything. I was suddenly wary, some of my intoxication ebbing away as he put on a show of trying to get the address right. I remembered those stories about the girls that had gone missing, and I wondered if our names and faces would be on the news tomorrow. Would they think we just wandered off after drinking too much? Would they even look for us? He turned down a side road, saying he was going to turn around, but instead of turning around, he kept driving. I banged feebly at the glass that separated us, telling him he was going the wrong way, but I was so weak. I felt very dehydrated, my mouth dry and my head spinning. I reached for the water, but I thought better of it. I didn't want anything he might give us, and as the top came off, I squeezed it against the little holes that allowed us to hear him. He jumped and cursed, turning around to glower at me as the voice from the phone came back again. You stupid bitch! I hope you keep that energy when they get you. They'll teach you some manners. My blood ran cold at that, and I let the empty water bottle fall as I looked for other options. I tried the doors, but the child locks were on, and I couldn't get it open. I started to panic. I kicked at the door, at the glass, but each kick was more feeble than the last. I was starting to feel like I might pass out. The cabbie laughed, telling me about all the terrible things the people he was taking me to would do, and my vision was swimming with tears. I bent over and puked in the floorboard, some of my wooziness clearing up as I purged the liquor, but it also left me feeling weak and unsteady. I banged my head against the glass as we finally came to a halt, and I went shakily to the window to see where we were. We were not miraculously in front of my apartment, the whole thing a dream or a hallucination, but in a vacant lot down some country back road. At the end of the vacant lot, perched like a gargoyle, was a white van waiting for us to arrive. As we sat idling, the doors came open and shadowy figures started getting out. I felt my blood run cold as they walked towards us, stopping halfway between as if waiting for the cabbie. I thought again about my car sitting in front of Sandy's house and how I could have driven us home if I had just stayed sober. Looks like we've reached your destination, said the cabbie, turning around to flash me a big creepy grin as he slid his seatbelt off. Don't go anywhere. I'll be right back. And he hopped out to go talk to them. I shook Felicia, trying to wake her up, but she was little more than dead weight. They would get her. They would get me in my current weakened condition. I couldn't fight them off. I could barely keep my head up, and I cried bitter tears in the back of that cab. If I was lucky, maybe they'd just kill us, but I doubted it. We were both likely to end up in some overseas brothel or on the streets of South America, and either prospect was grim. The cabbie shook hands with one of the shadow people, pointing back at the cab and likely telling them he had a couple of half-drunk girls ready for transport. We were in the middle of nowhere. There was no chance anyone was coming to help us. We'd be heading wherever in no time, gone and forgotten, never to be seen again, and there was nothing we could do about it. It appeared, however, that someone had other ideas. They had started walking towards the cab when lights suddenly lit up the back glass. Cars suddenly began pulling up, vans and undercover cars, and people came out then with guns drawn. The men in the headlights of the cab put their hands up, and as they were surrounded and cuffed, they were dragged off to those vans pretty quickly. They took the men away, and that was when they seemed to realize that they had people in the back of the cab. They helped us get somewhere safe so they could get us checked out, and I'm pretty sure Felicia never woke up through the whole thing. They kept assuring us that we were okay, that we were safe, but all I could do was cry. I felt like I had been plucked from the brink at the last minute, and I thanked them with every breath I had. That was how I was almost trafficked by some gang or organization or another. The cops told us the less we knew, the better, and I agreed. I haven't drank since then, and now I'm a permanent designated driver for our group. I take friends of friends home, too, sometimes intoxicated women we've met that night, just to make sure that no one goes through what we went through. So be wary if you see a strange cabbie waiting while you're wandering home one night. You may be in for a longer trip than you bargained for.
Always pays to be careful when you're going out for a night on the town. Coming up next, we have another story about someone who should have been careful, should have been a little bit more cautious. Here's a fellow who discovers a dangerous smile.
It all started with a trip to the bar. Some friends had invited me out after work for drinks. Given that we all work at the steel mill in this 2-stoplight rural town, that meant we were going to Dusty's. Dusty's is what's colloquially called a dive bar, but it's the only bar we have in town. It's a little roadhouse where you can drink watered-down beer, listen to country music, put some money in the jukebox, play some pool, or hit on the 7 or 8 half-dead barflies that are there every night. If you go to Dusty's for the atmosphere, then you're going to be disappointed. Most of us went there to watch the guys who worked for the town's only other reliable business, the logging company, drink too much and get in fights with people that are unprepared to stand toe-to-toe with them. That night in question was what you would call a slow night. I'd had about 3 pitchers of cheap beer, and the only fight we had seen was when someone's wife came in to drag him away from whatever tart he was talking to by the stage. Neither of them had been particularly skillful brawlers, and when they finally decided to just beat the crap out of her husband and drag him out of the parking lot, I told the guys I was going to turn in early. It was creeping up on midnight, and the bar was deader than usual. Dude, no way you're going to get a cab this late at night. You might as well stick around. Why wouldn't I be able to get a cab? Sandy's runs till 3 in the morning most nights. Charlie, the guy who had told me I wouldn't get a cab, leaned back on his stool so he could look at me. My cousin Dwayne says the cabs won't come out this far after 10 o'clock. They've been having trouble with people going missing. I rolled my eyes, walking my stool back so I didn't fall off of it. I was drunker than I thought I had been, and I didn't want to fall over in front of my friends. Yeah, I've been hearing those stories since I was a kid. Tell your cousin not to believe everything he reads on the internet. I took a staggering step towards the door, catching the bar with my hand as the room spun a little. Nah, Charlie protested. This is pretty recent. They say that the cabs have been arriving to pick up fares, but when they get there, no one is waiting. It's a big mystery, and no one's really sure what to think of it.
I scoffed at him, not really in the mood for any of that. I staggered out of Dusty's, taking out my cell phone as I tried to Google the number for Sandy's. I'd used it often enough that you'd think I could remember it, but in my current state, I couldn't remember much of anything. After 2 or 3 failed attempts, I managed to get the number in and got the receptionist after 3 long rings. "Sandy's Cabs, how can I help you?" "Yeah, I need to get a cab from Dusty's bar." I'd heard the clicking of keys on the other end of the phone, but when she learned my location, she seemed to change her mind. "I'm sorry, sir, we don't pick up from Dusty's anymore." I glowered at the phone, not quite sure I had heard her right. What kind of small-town cab company doesn't pick up from the biggest bar in town? "How come?" I asked. "It was deemed too detrimental to our clients." I guess Charlie had been right. "Okay, well, where can I catch a cab?" There was some furious clicking, and when she came back, she almost seemed to be whispering, as if something might hear her. "There's a bus stop down by Richmond. The company has said that it's the closest to Dusty's that will pick up clients." "Richmond? It's almost 5 blocks from here." "Sorry, sir. If you want a cab, then that's where you'll have to go." I considered just going back inside to wait for the others, but decided I was ready to leave. A walk would probably do me some good anyway. "Fine. I'll meet them there in 30 minutes. The dispatcher said that she would dispatch a cab, and then promptly hung up on me. With that out of the way, I began my walk along the shoulder of the rural road. Fortunately, the weather was pretty good for early June. The pine trees on the left side of the road, the side I was walking on, made a skittering sound in the wind, and it sent a chill down my spine. The thick swab of pulpwood trees seemed to stretch on for miles, and the farther I walked, the more it felt like something was watching me. It was little more than a tickle on the side of my face, the slight attention of something that I couldn't really see, but the farther I went, the more the regard rankled me. I tried to brush it off, telling myself I was just feeling creeped out after a long walk in the middle of the night. But I heard the pine needles crunching lightly beneath something and decided to speed up. I tried to convince myself it was just a deer or a fox that I had disturbed up, and it would leave off after it got a sniff of me. They were more afraid of me than I was of them, and once they realized it, they'd take off. The farther I walked, though, the more I thought about the disappearance that Charlie had talked about. I wasn't much for news. I didn't even have a cable subscription, but I was shocked that I hadn't heard anything about these kidnappings or whatever they were. The thought that there might be something watching me from the woods with intentions of making me its next victim made me speed up a little more. I had to stop myself from running as I ate up the road. What would I do when I got to the bus stop if there was no cab there? Would I really be able to just sit in the terminal and wait while whatever was out there kept watching me? I shook the feeling off, feeling silly. It's just a raccoon or a possum or something. Just because it seemed to be going in the same direction I was didn't necessarily mean it had ill intentions. I tried to ignore the soft sound of indignant pine needles as they broke underfoot, but the farther we went, the harder it became. It was just an animal, I told myself. I had just disturbed it in whatever had brought it out tonight, and now it was curious of me. It would go on its way soon. It would leave me alone if I just ignored it. I kept telling myself that, but the further I went, the harder it was to believe. It seemed to be stalking me from behind the dark forest, a predator intent on man-flesh. It looked like some kind of hunting cat, its head boxy and its body sleek and long. It slunk quietly along behind me, plotting its attack as it prepared to spring. That was stupid, I told myself. There was nothing there. I was just making myself paranoid. I was imagining the sound of large, flat paws on pine falls. I was creating the slightly elevated breathing of the animal. If I turned now, I wouldn't see anything but the shadows and the pine trees. I tried to make my head turn, but my neck seemed unwilling. I remembered something that my grandma had said once when I was a kid, and her voice rustled through my mind like a ghost.
Some things don't like being seen, and when you see them, you can't take it back. When I saw the lights of the bus stop, I almost broke into a run. I made myself walk, however, because things like that love to chase, too. As I got closer to the bus stop, I became aware of someone sitting in the lighted shell. As I got closer, I could see it was a woman, her head down and her body abnormally still. I wanted to call out to her to warn her about the thing that was following me, but as I moved closer to the stop, I realized it had broken off its chase at some point. I breathed a sigh of relief, laughing at myself for psyching myself up. It had all been in my head after all, and I had never really been in any danger. As I came into the light of the bus stop, I almost laughed, my smile hard to hide. "Something funny?" asked the woman, lifting her head to look at me. My smile soured a little. Her voice sounded strange in the bus shell, and I worried that I might have offended her. "No, it's just I was worried about something, and it appears to have all been in my head. I was mostly laughing at myself for being foolish." I realized now that I was here that she was sitting with her knees against her face, and she had leaned her head against her knees as she turned to look at me. She was a stringy thing, older teens or early 20s, and her hair looked oily as it hung about her face like filthy drapes in a rundown trailer. She was dressed in something that had once been a sack or maybe curtains, and I wondered if she might be homeless. Worst of all, she had a smell about her, a smell that was not altogether pleasant, a smell that reminded me of my grandfather's smokehouse after hunting season, of the remains of animals left behind that smokehouse. "What was it?" she asked, her teeth looking too big in her mouth as she smiled. I was afraid of being stalked by some kind of hunting cat," I said, surprising myself by speaking at all. "A cat? In this part of the world?" She scooted a little closer to me, a minute movement, but too much for me. This part of the world is more accustomed to bears, I hear," she said. As she scooted this time, I scooted away. Like I said, it was just a feeling. "What kind of feeling?" she asked, scooting again, though I couldn't figure out how. Her arms were around her legs, her knees against her cheek, and she seemed to have no means of scooting at all. It was, I stuttered, my mouth suddenly very dry. "It was like being Red Riding Hood while the wolf stalked her." At that moment, I was as sober as I had ever been. Between the creature and the girl, all the drink had been burned out of me, and I suddenly wondered if the creature might have left because it smelled her. Her smile threatened to cut her cheeks. "I imagine that was exhilarating. Did you enjoy feeling like the prey for once? Did your blood demand that you run, but your mind insisted that walking would be safer? Did you know how much I wanted to chase you?" My heart was pounding, loud enough for me to hear it. She had just admitted to being the one that was stalking me. She couldn't have been the thing in the woods. There was no way. She had been here when I arrived. There was no way she could have dogged my heels through the woods and then gotten here before me. It was impossible. My brain told me these things, but I found it harder and harder to believe as she slowly backed me into the side of the bus shell. I wanted to run, but I knew that was what she wanted too. "You thought you'd be safe once you made it to the light, didn't you, manling? Little did you know that monsters don't always shrivel in the light." She was very close now, her legs coming down as she unfurled herself. She was bigger than I had thought, her body thin and long as she pulled herself onto the bench. She was on all fours, that grin very disconcerting as it came closer. She was feral looking, some wild woman from the depths of a dark jungle as
As she prepared to spring, I saw a pair of headlights pin her to the spot as they approached us. I did run then. I ran from the bench and threw myself into the cab, telling the man to drive before the door was even shut. He looked confused, turning back to the girl as if to ask if she needed a ride too, but his confusion didn't last. The color drained from his face as he got a look at her, and he yelled for me to close the door. He pulled off with a squeal of tires, and we both watched the woman as we drove away, her smiling face getting smaller as she watched us. I leaned against the seat, panting as I tried to control my galloping heart. He had to try a couple of times before I could hear him over the blood pounding in my ears, and when I finally made sense of it, we were turning around to get back on the route. "You got very lucky, fella. More lucky than you know." I asked him why I thought so, and he told me a story I'll never forget. A couple of nights ago, I got a call to that same bus stop to pick up a fare. Dispatch said he sounded weird when he called, like he'd been running, but his car had broke down near the stop, so he figured he had just been pissed off about his luck. I pulled up about 20 minutes later and found not a middle-aged man fuming over his car, but that same girl with the Cheshire Cat grin on her face. She looked up at me as I came to stop, and I just knew that if I got out of my cab, they'd never find me again. The area near Dusty's is supposed to be off limits, and after tonight, I don't think Sandy's will be picking up out here until the situation changes. I've been sitting in my living room, hands shaking as I write this, but unsure of what to do now. I called Charlie before I got into my apartment, but I don't think they really believed me. Charlie was pretty drunk and sounded like he thought I was making fun of him. I hope they make it home safe, but it's that dangerous smile that I can't get out of my mind. She's out there somewhere, waiting for her next victim, and I feel very fortunate to be able to tell you my story and not be a squib in tomorrow's paper.
One more story for you, and I think I've got a pretty good one to take us out on. It's a story about a journey that begins at the tap of a finger. A woman who's discovered how to travel wherever, whenever, with only a simple knock. So let's learn one of those hard truths about if I knock on it, it becomes a door.
Her name was Janice, and I'll never forget her. We met one night at this dive bar that I used to frequent. Dusty's was barely even stable enough to be called a bar, but the drinks were cheap and the music was pretty good, and it was in the right part of town for a broke college kid like me to get a few beers in after class. They had a pretty shaky ID policy, and the bartender never looked twice at my clearly doctored ID. I wouldn't be 21 for another year when I started drinking there, and he didn't seem to mind. I got the feeling that if it wasn't for drunk college kids with fake IDs, the bar probably wouldn't be able to stay open. So the owner hid under the plausible deniability of our poorly constructed glamour. I had been drinking for about the last 6 months when I saw her. Most of Dusty's crowd was college kids with ramen stains on their shirts, winos from the alley behind the bar, and the odd junkie or guy looking to sell a bag of something to somebody else. We didn't get a lot of fights there, but it was definitely not the pinnacle of Western civilization. She stood out like a neon tube in a school fluorescent. She was wearing a purple sequin jacket with something a lighter shade of purple underneath it. She had on what could have been charitably called a skirt, but it was probably more similar to a tutu. She had on socks that went up to her knees, and a pair of Doc Martens that looked like they'd kick your teeth in if you made her mad. She was sitting at the bar, and she was smoking a cigarette, and as I came in, I watched the ash fall into her glass and slowly drowned. She didn't seem to care. She finished the drink and then started patting her pockets for another cigarette. Before she could find her smokes, I reached into my own pocket and fished out a pack of Marlboro Reds and offered her one. She looked at the pack and grinned before reaching out to take one, and began the shakedown dance again so she could find a lighter. Her face illuminated oddly when I brought out my own lighter, and she smiled as she leaned towards the flame. A gentleman, and a gentleman who's prepared as well. My name is Janus. What's yours? I told her my name was Bert, and we spent the rest of the night talking. I usually only stayed in Dusty's until I was drunk enough to stumble back to my dorm room and pass out, but when the old man called last call around 3 a.m., I realized I'd been there for several hours. I didn't mind. I'd been having fun talking to her. As we kept drinking, the subject matter became a little hazy, but that was okay too. It was all right. Everything was all right, and her sparkly jacket seemed to glimmer under the harsh fluorescence of the bar as the alcohol made halos around the rhinestones. Looks like this wound's about to close, she said with a laugh as she put her glass down and tossed some money on the bar. You heading out, or are you feeling like maybe drinking a little more? I don't get a lot of play from women. My body type is similar to that of a potato, but I knew a come-on when I heard one. I told her I'd be glad to do a little more drinking, and she took me by the hand and led me towards the back of the bar where the bathrooms were. I was hesitant, not wanting to get banned from Dusty's for getting up to a little hanky-panky in a bathroom stall, but when I tried to pull away, her grip became firm, and she told me to trust her. I didn't really see many options as we came to the door of the women's room. She looked around conspiratorially and then turned back to me. Do you know something cool about the universe, Bert? I shook my head slowly. It's something I discovered when I was very young. Something that's taken me places all my life. I don't know if it's like this for you, she said as she reached back and rapped her knuckles 3 times on the door. But for me, the one cosmic truth has always been this. If you knock on it, it becomes a door. I laughed. I thought she was drunker than I was, but then my laugh became a gasp as she opened the door, and I saw a sea of glowing tubes and heard music that wouldn't be popular for another 10 years at this point. I saw smoke and heard a beat that seemed to move through my bones. People had turned to look at the disturbance, and then she pulled me through the door and let it close behind her. Suddenly, we were in a strange place that was so alien, it might as well be on another planet. That was the first time I stepped through one of those doors, but it wouldn't be the last. I would come to discover that she had taken me to what was called a rave. There was a man on a podium with a computer that was much smaller than the one I had back in my dorm room. It was pumping out music that I could feel in my fillings, and the people on the floor were dancing in a way that made me think they might be on drugs. She pushed through them and went to the bar, Janus getting me something to drink as I took it all in. I met Janus in 1992, and at that point, this was just about the weirdest thing I had ever seen. How do you do that? I asked, having to shout over the music. I don't know, she said with a little shrug. It's just something I've always been able to do. For my whole life, anytime I needed to go somewhere, I would just knock and it would take me somewhere else. I don't know if I'm a time traveler or it's just another dimension. I don't even know if we're on the same planet or not, but I know it's fun, and I'll probably keep doing it till I die. We danced a little, or did what amounted to dancing in this place, but after a while, we went off somewhere quieter and started talking. Janus told me that she had been traveling like this since she was about 6 years old. She might have been traveling longer than that. She couldn't remember, but 6 years old was when she had started time traveling for real. My parents had sent me to bed without supper because of something I had said to a teacher. I told my teacher that blue whales were not the biggest animal in the ocean, and she laughed at me and told me I was wrong. She stopped laughing when I told her that she was wrong, like she knew what was in the ocean. Anyway, so my parents sent me to bed without supper, and I decided that if they weren't going to feed me, then I would feed myself. So I knocked on my closet door and went into this strange back alley place so that I could try to find some food. I didn't have any control over where the doors open. That's one of the major problems with knocking. I could travel, but I never know where it's going to bring me out. Back then, I just explored wherever it took me, thinking that nothing would hurt me in that way that children always do. It was an adventure, and I would come out on the other side in the same shape that I always had, just like the kids in the fantasy stories that I read. It didn't happen like that this time. Some people got a hold of me and tried to sell me to some other people as slave labor or something. Apparently, I'd come out in some sort of Dickensian version of the United States, and I was just some orphan girl in weird clothes. It took me a while, but I managed to get away from them and started knocking on doors as I tried to get back. Sometimes, if I knocked on the same door or near the place that I had come out through, I could go back to the place that I had come from. It took me some time to get back to that exact alley, but when I knocked on the wall, it turned into a door, and I stepped out through my closet. She took a long drag off her cigarette as she let the music in the warehouse behind us thump through her body, clearly trying to find the words for what came next. The problem is, time works different on that side of things. I hadn't been gone for a couple of days or a week or two, like I had over there. I'd been missing for 2 years. I came back to discover that the room that had once been mine wasn't mine anymore. Nobody lived in my house, and everything was dark and cold. Some of my clothes were still there, and I put them in a backpack and started exploring what was left. My parents were gone. Whether they'd moved or died or whatever, I didn't know. There was nobody there to greet me, and the house was abandoned, so I decided to knock on another door and move again. After that, I just kept moving, just kept knocking, just kept living. I stole things when I needed to, I worked when I needed to, and mostly I just kept traveling. I don't even know if the version of my parents' house that I came out on was mine or not, but I didn't care. I'd seen things in my time in that city that had made me very afraid, and I knew now that what I saw on the other side of the doors could hurt me. I didn't want to be hurt anymore, so I just kept moving. That's a rough way to live, especially for a little kid, I said lamely as I watched my own cigarette burn down in my hand. I wasn't even smoking it anymore. The conversation had stolen my attendance, and when it fell to the ground, I didn't even pick it up. Yeah, I guess so. It was just life for me. I've been traveling ever since, seeing everything and doing whatever. It's lonely out there sometimes. I take people with me on occasions, and eventually I drop them off somewhere else, and they go about their own sort of lives. Nobody stays for long. Most people don't want to travel aimlessly forever, but it's all I've ever known. We stood in silence for a moment, me trying to find something to say, and her clearly weighing her next words. I like you, Bert. You seem like a fun guy. Would you like to travel with me for a while? I can't promise that it'll always be comfortable, but it will be interesting. You look like you could use a little interesting in your life. I started to say yes. Absolutely no hesitation, but my better judgment got the better of me. My life wasn't perfect. I was swimming in college debt, and my classes were slowly circling the drain. But I only had about 6 months of my degree left before I might be able to have something worthwhile. That something worthwhile was probably just a job that would help me pay off my student loans, but it was something. I couldn't just up and abandon everything. My dad had died when I was in high school, but my mom had been trying her best to help me when she could. She would be distraught if I just suddenly vanished, and I couldn't do that to her. Tell you what, you keep coming back to Dusty's, and I'll keep showing up for adventures. Is that an option? She laughed, and then she leaned in to kiss me, and her mouth tasted like cigarettes and a strange miasma of alcohols. Tasted like something else, too, however. It tasted foreign, like she'd eaten meals that I didn't have names for, like she drunk water from streams in places that I had never seen and would never see, and something else below the surface that I couldn't place at the time. Janus tasted like freedom. Tell you what, I'll keep hanging around Dusty's for a couple of months. If you change your mind and you want to come with me when I decide to tumbleweed out of here, I'll take you with me. Fair warning, if you stop seeing me for a while, then it probably means I've moved on. I don't stay in any place more than a couple of months, and that's just the way I like it. She took me back to the spot we'd come out of, and when we stepped back through, I saw the bartender look up and shake his head at me. What are you, some kind of magician? I swear I just checked that bathroom. Well, you're pretty lucky. I was just about to close up and go home. Get out of here. I'm sure I'll see you back tonight. I turned around, but Janus didn't come with me. The door had just become a regular bathroom door again, and I walked back to my dorm room with my head buzzing. I'd seen more in that night than I'd seen in my 3 years of college, and I found that I wanted to see more. I'd never even been out of my hometown, and as I settled in for bed, I thought that a little traveling might be the best thing for me. It would need to come after, though. I needed to be done with this part of my life first, and then we could see what would come after. I didn't see Janus at Dusty's every night, but I saw her there regularly. We didn't wait till last call after the first night. She would take me by the hand and lead me to a door, sometimes through the bathroom and sometimes through the door at the back of the room, and then she would take me to these wonderful and sometimes terrifying places. Sometimes we would go to parties, and sometimes we would just explore fantastical places, but our trips were never boring. We danced beneath 4 moons in a forest that looked as alien as the bottom of an ocean must. We drank unnamed cocktails in a monochrome bar full of slug people. We skied down snow as pristine as porcelain on a planet that never got below 80 degrees. We danced to music that you didn't hear with your ears, but you felt in every other sense in your body. We also hid from creatures made entirely of shadow, were hunted through the woods by strange, deformed canines, got yelled at by creatures whose language was completely unintelligible, and stood in a room full of mirror versions of ourselves who were slightly different or slightly worse. In those 6 months, I saw more things than I could describe, did more things than I could ever even begin to talk about, and felt free for the first time in a long time. Something else happened that I hadn't expected either. Janus and I started to grow closer. It started with her grabbing my hand and holding my fingers tight, but eventually it became something else. It was an arm thrown over my shoulder. It was her head against my chest as we danced. It was her lips on mine under the stars. It was her eyes when she would look at me as we stood together. Sometimes she would throw herself at me without warning, and for a guy who had been in the middle of a 2-year dry spell, I suddenly had a rather active sex life. I don't know when I decided that I loved her, but I believe she felt the same. It was so obvious that she had feelings for me as well, but I suppose it was only obvious to me. Something else happened that I hadn't expected. Somehow, as I traveled to strange places and saw wondrous things, I found my grades increasing and my desire to finish school refreshed. I seemed to have a new lease on life, and suddenly I wasn't content to get drunk and stumble home and fall into unconsciousness. I wanted more than my single existence, and I decided that I didn't want to simply be dropped somewhere when she grew tired of me. I wanted to see it all, and more than that, I wanted to see it all with her. After a few months, it was time to graduate and see all my efforts rewarded. I invited Janice to my graduation. She laughed at me and said that of course she'd be there. My mom would be there, so would my siblings, and they looked at the strangely dressed woman as she waved and screamed my name from the bleachers. She hugged me and stood for photos as I stood in my cap and gown, and afterwards she took me out to celebrate. She took me to a cliffside that overlooked an oddly purple ocean as it lapped against the rocks behind us. She had set up a sort of picnic, and as she pulled it out of her bag and laid it on the ground, she patted a pillow and invited me to come sit with her. I had a little more than celebrating on my mind that night. I was going to ask Janice to stay with me. I was going to offer to go with her, to travel with her, and I'd already asked Mom if I could have the ring that Dad had given her. I know how stupid that sounds. 6 months is absolutely no time to have known someone. But when I was with Janice, everything felt right. We drank and ate and talked about life and discussed what we would do next. And that's when I approached the subject. I think I'm ready to go with you. Janice squealed and threw her arms around me, spilling champagne down my back as she did so. Oh my gosh, yes! I'm so happy to hear that, Bert. You won't regret it. We're going to have a blast. There's something I want to ask you before we go, though. Something I want to know. She laughed and looked at me as if she thought I was going to ask her what I needed to pack or if I was ever going to come back. When I pulled the ring out, it seemed to be the last thing that she had expected. I don't want to be your temporary companion, Janice. I want to be with you forever. I want to travel forever with you. Will you marry me? I'd expected joy or tears or astonishment, but I wasn't prepared when she began to back away from me. She looked confused, like she couldn't understand what I was asking. Her hands were still by her mouth, but she looked unsure instead of speechless. When I reached out for her, wanting to comfort her through whatever this was, she pulled away from me and shook her head. Janice, what's wrong? I'm ready to go with you. I want to travel with you forever. The tears were really coming down now, and as she reached out for the ring, her hands shook. Bert, I want to say yes, but I'm just not sure. She struggled with words and finally came up with, I care for you very deeply, but everyone I get close to ultimately leaves. She closed her eyes and shook her head slowly as she tried to make sense of it. I need to think about this. Can I think about it? Can I give you an answer tomorrow night? I nodded, not having much else to do, and as she took me back to the bar and left me at the door to the storage room, her kiss felt heated and uncertain. Worse, it felt conflicted, and as I walked home, I hoped I would see her tomorrow. Whether the answer was yes or no, I just wanted to see her again. I came back the next day, but Janice was nowhere to be found. I came back the next night, but she was still nowhere to be seen. I came back every night for 2 weeks. I came back until college left a notice that it was time to vacate my dorm room. But I never saw Janice again. I drove from my house to the bar a few times, but she was never there. I found myself feeling lost after that. I just drifted for a while, nothing really mattering, but my mind was never far from Janice. I didn't know if she had rejected my proposal or if something had happened to her, but after 3 months of wondering, I made a decision that would change my life. I took the money my family had given me after graduation. I closed out my bank account. I packed some clothes in a backpack, and I just left. I headed out into the world with no plans, no destination, and only one idea in my head. I would look for her until I found her, or until the day I die. That was years ago. I've been out of college for decades, but I still find myself visiting bars and looking for Janus. I sit in the back and scan the crowd. Sometimes I drink, sometimes I don't. But when it's closing time, I always move on. In my own way, I'm traveling, just like her. I've made my way to the West Coast twice now, and when I do, I turn around and walk back. When I need money, I do day labor or handyman work. When I'm tired, I find somewhere out of the way to sleep. When I find someone willing to give me a ride, I take it. When I find a bar, I stop and stay until last call. I'm older now, no longer the bright-eyed kid I was for the 8 months that we knew each other. She probably wouldn't even recognize me anymore. I don't care. I don't care if she rejects me. I don't care if she hates me. I just want to see her one more time and ask her why she never came back. If I die before I see her again, then maybe I'll get my answers sooner rather than later. Until then, I'll keep traveling. I'll keep looking. I'll keep seeking the doors.
And just like that, our stories are at an end for another day. But don't worry, we'll be back again very soon with more Cozy Horror. Until then, this is Dr. Plague, wishing you a wonderful day and a spooky evening.